bet you one of your New Year's resolutions is to sew from your stash. Sounds simple, right? But then we pull out our fabrics and somehow they don't play nicely together. Here is my first Stashbuster of the year. It's fast, easy, and fat quarter friendly. And best of all, I'm going to have some tips on those hard to mix fabrics. And did I mention that it comes in 3 sizes? So stick with me and I'll show you how to do it. Hi there, I'm Karen Brown of Just Get It Done Quilts. I give you tips, tricks, and strategies to help you make the quilt that you want to make. If you're like me, one of your New Year's resolutions is to sew from your stash. I specifically would like to use up some of these fat quarter bundles that seem to be a major weakness of mine. They're just like a stack of colorful jewels that call to me, and then I bring them home and lay them out, and then I go, now what? Has this ever happened to you? Leave a comment down in the notes. I'm calling this Stashbuster the Beginner Bargello. And in this video, we're going to be making the lap quilt size, which is perfect for a fat quarter bundle. One you bought or one you make up yourself. So let's get going. Now, Bargello is an Italian style of needlepoint that quilters have borrowed. It uses both sharp contrast and gradual contrast to make some dynamic, beautiful designs. For this version of the quilt, you will need 10 to 13 fat quarters. My family is tall, so I'm going with 13. Before you start, you want to lay out all your fabrics and line them up in the flow that you want. You could choose to lay out your colors going in a subtle way from cold to warm or from light to dark, or insert distinct jumps in value, hue, or saturation to create some really interesting designs. This is how I will be laying out my colors. Since all quilts start with a fabric pull, when I started planning out this video, I thought I'd talk about problem fabrics first. But I found the tips made a lot more sense once you understood how the quilt was put together. So after I finish the quilt top, I'm going to talk about those tips. So before you cut your fat quarters, give them all a good press. I've said it before, but if they've been in storage for a little while, you'll probably have some sharp creases. This pattern is perfect for directional fabrics that the design is going from selvage to selvage. Stack as many fat quarters as you are comfortable cutting at once, whether it be 1, 6, or 16. The choice is yours. Don't be shamed into stacking more than you're comfortable with. But make sure you're using a sharp blade. If you can't remember the last time you changed it, change it now. So we're going to square up along the bottom, then cut. Then we're going to measure 18 inches, then cut and trim the top. Trim off the selvages. And we're going to make 3 cuts. Measure up 6 inches, then cut. Measure up another 6 inches and cut. You now have 3 pieces 6 inches by 20. Make 3 piles, stacking the fabrics in the order that you're going to sew them together. We're going to call them A, B, and C. Make sure all the directional fabrics are pointing the right way. You may want to have a cheat sheet or take a photograph or number all the different blocks just to be sure that you keep them all in order. I always like to start new projects with a new needle, and I'm also making a sewing ledge. Make sure you have a stack of scraps for leaders and enders while you're making this. I have made a video on both of these items, and if you haven't seen them yet, I'm going to put a link in the notes. I stitched the identical pair from each stack at the same time. I did this to prevent me from mixing up the order of fabrics and keeping the directional fabrics pointing in the right direction. And it worked. I only mixed up once. So to keep these strips nice and square and running parallel to each other, you need to be able to sew straight and iron well. And I have a video on both of these techniques. If you haven't watched them yet, I'll put a link in the notes. Then I sewed sets of 4 together, then pressed. Then I sewed those sets together and then pressed. until I had 3 long identical pieces. And then I gave the whole strip another good press. Strip set A we're going to use as our reference point. From set B, we are going to trim 4 inches from the bottom piece and then add it to the top. To strip set C, we're going to take the fabric from the bottom of the stack and we're going to put it on the top. So now we are going to cut smaller strips from these big strips. From strip set A, we are going to cut 3 6.5-inch strips with a very small piece at the end. From strip set B, we are going to cut 6 3.5-inch strips. And from strip set C, we are going to cut 4 5-inch strips. When you're using a long strip on a smaller cutting mat, the trick is how you fold it. So you want to make sure that your sewing lines are lining up with the lines on your cutting mat. Each and every seam should be parallel to one line on your cutting mat. And then you line up your ruler on the perpendicular lines and your strips will be straight. So let's make this top. We take a strip A and attach a B strip to the left and a B strip to the right and repeat it so we have 3 sets. Now as we combine them together, the important thing is keeping the horizontal lines aligned across all 3 strips. So I make a template out of cardboard. I cut it the same width as the block and I measure 1 3/4 inches up from the bottom. I make a little notch, then I mark it on both sides of each piece in strip A. And I align the seams in strip B to this mark as I sew. Now I find it's easiest to sew a strip B to the left side of strip A first. And then when I put on the other side, it's easy to be sure that the 2 seams are exactly the same. And of course, press. Next, we add a piece C on the left side of the 3 pieces and the right side of the last piece, and then we sew them all together. But we still have to keep an eye that all those C pieces are aligned. Then we just sew it all together. And we give it a good press, getting ready for quilting. Now let's talk about tricky fabrics. When I first saw these fabrics, this is called London with Love. They are all stunning and iconic, but when I bought a fat quarter bundle and I laid them all out, they just became this busy mess with no center. The good news is that there's some strategies to fix this. So I'm going to talk and I'm going to use words like hue, value, and saturation. If you're not sure what I mean, I have a color series and I'm going to link that in the notes below. So my first tip is to add a solid color. This is a place where your eyes can rest. When our eyes see patterns, they go racing around trying to find the center or the dominant pattern. This collection doesn't have a dominant fabric, so introducing a solid color will give your eyes a raft to rest on. Tip number 2, solid color helps you fill in a color story. These fabrics, there is a very dark navy and you have 3 very light colors and the rest is somewhere in the middle. I added 3 colors. I add Kona Pimento, which adds an anchor to this red zone of phone boxes, palace guards, and buses. For the blue story, the 2 blues are exactly the same hue, but they're quite a distance from each other on the color wheel, because one has white in it and one has a lot of black in it. So the blue I choose here is actually Kona Deep Blue to help bridge the two colors and add a smoother transition. The coral is just a desaturated version of this red. If I matched up the coral exactly as it is in the print, it would just be too bright, and the fabrics are really very high in value. So I've actually chosen a slightly more desaturated coral to go with these fabrics, again to help bridge it. My third tip is to use a pattern that accentuates your fabric strengths. Every single one of these fabrics is directional. The crowns, the words, the Union Jacks, they all have an up and down. So this quilt and the cutting directions all allowed me to keep the prints line in the same way. There were also some strong horizontal elements. The buses were going from right to left, the telephone boxes standing side by side, and the guards all standing in a line. So I fussy cut these so that each strip was identical in appearance. It did make the strip narrower, but I chose a pattern where this wasn't a problem. So I was able to do an after quilt, but I'm going to talk about the details of that in my next video. And when I make it, I'm going to put a link in the notes below. I know I've been saying it for 6 months that I've been making it. It really is going to be my next video. So it's cold outside and too cold to go outside and spray base my quilt. So I've taped the quilt back to a wall in my condo's fire escape. I use basting spray and smooth as I go. It's really the same motion as applying wallpaper or a screen protector. You smooth out the creases, and sometimes when they're too big, you have to lift it up and spread it out again. I repeat with the quilt top on top of the batting. And when I bring it down off the wall, I actually put it out on my counter and I just smooth it out one more time. There's these without the tension of the tape on it, things can pucker, and I just take the opportunity to do it one last spread. And I flip it over and I do it on the other side too. Now when I designed this quilt, I thought a vertical straight sewing would be perfect just to work with the strips of the quilt. But I chose fabric that had these very strong horizontal elements. So I decided that wasn't going to work. Then I decided I would do these nice loopy, wavy lines, but I did about 2 feet of this and then realized this wasn't going to work either. So I decided to just go a different pattern in each and every fabric and change my threads to match the fabric. It took twice as long, maybe even 3 times as long. But part of my goal to improve my skill is to take it slower, not try to rush through it quite as fast, and to pay more attention. It's far from perfect, but I'm okay with that. I went with a dark navy binding, which is a desaturated low-value blue. I chose that color because I want it to frame in these light areas. Because the navy is desaturated, it doesn't compete with the bright colors of the quilt. I just love the way that this quilt has turned out. I really like the fussy cutting and how it gives the fabrics an extra punch. I like how the soldiers look like they're standing on a parapet now, and how from a distance it appears to be raining on the umbrellas. So just some final notes here. This pattern is very easy to alter to your needs. As I said before, you can add and subtract fat quarters depending on how tall or short you want the quilt to be. I showed you that you can even make your strips narrower to accommodate some fussy cutting, but you can also make the quilt narrower by taking a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch off some or all of the strips, which I might have done just by cutting one set raw. The small and large version of this quilt is made with width of fabric strips instead of fat quarters. And don't forget to use scrap squares for leaders and enders. In this project, this is how many 4 patches I was able to make. If you would like the pattern for this Stashbuster quilt, you can download it on my website at justgetitdonequilts.com, and I'll put a link in the notes. And I think this fabric is still on sale at Sew Sisters, so if you're interested, I'll put a link to that in the notes below. If you want to watch any of the videos I have referenced, just click on the thumbnail right there. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that bell beside the subscribe button to be notified when I make new videos. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest at Just Get It Done Quilts. So take care, and I'll see you next time.